Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the All Yellow podcast, episode 12. It's a new format in OP15, so we're going to change the name of the episode just for this one. I am Yonas here today after a very long hiatus and joined with Hrvoje and Kai. How are you guys doing?
I'm doing well. It's been a little while. It's my fault that we've had a bit of a hiatus, so hopefully we can sort that out.
Yeah, I'm doing wonderfully. The witch got banned. It's not the perfect ban list, of course. We're going to talk about it, but it's what I wanted for a while. So great job, Bandai.
I think that's definitely the first thing that we should mention is that Hrvoje's most broken card in the game, his Omen, the card that didn't exist when he got second place in the world, and he hasn't been to Worlds ever since. Pudding is banned.
The path to redemption starts now.
Do you have any first impressions? It's been a little while since the ban announcement has been out, but just thoughts now that it's actually officially been banned.
I think the playstyles we're going to see are going to be a lot more... Well, this is going to encompass a discussion of OP15 format later, but we're going to see a lot more games with many, many more cards in hand than we are used to when blue decks are involved, which I think will be interesting in some ways, especially in how various decks can abuse it. Once again, I'll go into more detail once we get to OP15. Honestly, part of me was not expecting them to have the awareness to do it, because it doesn't feel like a ban that necessarily is tied to like surface level understanding of the game. It's more like, okay, this card is toxic for reasons which are not immediately obvious to everyone because you need to play the card the correct way. And when Bandai does bans like this, my faith in their like testing department and their like decision making grows, just because, well, the ban list, again, I don't think it was perfect, but it does show some awareness of how the game functions competitively. And yeah, on a casual like locals level, this might not be optimal just because people don't enjoy those play patterns with decks having a lot of cards in their hand, but ultimately the ban list is for balancing competitive. So yeah, overall I'm very, very pleased with the decision. I did make a tweet which was a bit inflammatory, I think. Hope for more, but I'm going to be satisfied with this. I'm sure you guys have your opinions as well.
As a person who's played plenty of Pudding, I'm also very happy for this card to be banned. I do think that there needs to be some sort of like hand check that should exist in the format. I just felt like Pudding, aside from just making sure that people didn't have too many cards in hand, also made a lot of games very reductive. Like a lot of times the games would just go for Pudding lethal regardless of how many cards they had in hand or how the game is played out beforehand, which is like very frustrating for a lot of people. And I do think that trying to supplement that post-rotation with cards like 4-cost Starter Deck Law, 5-cost Kuzan, or 5-cost Isho from Ace, 6-cost Robin, like other similar things, or even a little bit more potent things that might print in the future, might be a little bit more fair, instead of having this card that also works as a hand rip tool, that also can just like be a finisher in a lot of aspects.
Yeah, I've never been a fan of Pudding. There's like, how I kind of see Pudding is there's the sort of like, the intellectual bell curve where like the people who are bad at the game say you should ban Pudding because they don't know how to play against it. But then there's people in the middle who say you shouldn't ban Pudding because you know how to play against it. Then there's people at the end again who say you should ban Pudding because they understand how to use it correctly. And I feel like that's where a lot of the debate has come from, where people don't know exactly how to gauge Pudding's power, because I think you need to get Pudding at 4 cards in hand to realize how strong that is sometimes. So you just have like 3 Gungam Giants in hand and you get reduced down to like 3k counter total even though your hand size went up. And there's like very little counterplay in that. So for me, I'm happy the card is gone. I'm happy that I can make my hand massive against Hancock. I think that, as you kind of mentioned, that they have the design space as well now to make more tools that can actually rip hand, because I think blue thematically is the more card draw centered color, and I think that can extend to reducing the opponent's hand size as well. So I think that Pudding may leave a little bit of a hole in blue, but I think that they acknowledge that in banning Pudding, and that therefore they can make some more interesting cards. So yeah, like that Isho, like Law and whatnot, I think we may see some pretty interesting cards that interact with hand in the future now that card doesn't exist.
Just to kind of illustrate one of my most recent frustrations, I guess it's a bit dated, but when you were playing blue decks against GP Luffy, one of the most common interactions that came up is when you swung 5 at your GP Luffy opponent on your 4 Dawn turn. And the decision tree one is this. If your opponent took it, they have enough cards to pudding, so you should play pudding. And if your opponent countered the 5, that means they have Sanji pudding in hand, so you should play pudding. So it was like this weird like bifurcation where no matter what, you should just play pudding on your 4-down turn in a lot of blue matchups. And that in and of itself was like one of the most like ridiculous things that I've seen exemplify how frustrating pudding could be, even like early game. So
I want to say that the example Jonas gave is perfect because there was another element to it where if they just kept their hand going first and you had pudding, like you could force them to not keep the hand. And that's like interacting with like a very base game rules based decision at the beginning of the game. But okay, they kept their hand and their deck revolves around this one card, one curve they want to see. And either they play the searcher and you saw them add the card, so you know they have it, so you have to pudding them. Or they kept the hand, they didn't play searcher, so you know they have the card because they kept the hand. Singular decision points where you had to pudding them, and if they don't draw their play on 5, you would just probably win the game. Or like at least have the ability to pressure them and eventually maybe even pudding them later again. That was the case with Buggy. Very commonly.
I think that like we're all kind of touching upon good points, and at least for me, why I think that pudding should have been banned, and inevitably Bandai did agree with us, in that pudding isn't just a card that punishes large hand sizes, which is the argument for the most part for why pudding should exist, because it is true that you can play around the hand rip aspect of it. If you play sort of low in hand size, like 5 to 6 cards in hand, then you can manage the threat of pudding, because obviously putting on a 12 card hand is going to be good into any deck. But then it's just the aspect that there's the randomness where you can just re-roll, effectively forcing your opponent to mulligan their hand, and also just like by extension, messing with the amount of counter that they have in their hand in late game, regardless of the number of cards in their hand, and of course throwing them off their curve. I think that there's just too many ways that you could use pudding in the early game, mid game, and the late game, of course, that made it sort of omnipresent. And I think this is one of the lines that I stole from, I think, Hrvoje in like an earlier episode of the All Blue, where it's the only card in the game where you could win the game without ever actually playing it. I'm happy that it's gone, and I mean, it seems from talking to you guys that you guys agree as well.
Do you guys want to talk about the expected omission or unexpected omission and the reason why we're on the All Yellow podcast today?
Yeah.
The lack of touching either Borsalino or Quasar help from a lot of this yellow core that exists mainly in Boa and Nami. I know a lot of people in Japan and the people who have been playing with OP15 have been we're surprised this card wasn't banned, and it's been pretty powerful what I've seen in the OP15 format. Kai, what are your thoughts on it? Do you think that it should have been gone? Do you think the format needs to develop a little bit more? What are your initial thoughts on OP15 because of that?
Right, so I think I've made a video about like what I think should be banned, and I did mention Borsalino and Quasar, and I did kind of like mention it just as like a very problematic thing, because I was talking about like problematic combos within the game. But one thing that I didn't really want to go too deep into in that video, just because I didn't want to make it a very long video and like go off into a bunch of branches, is that in my opinion, the only reason why Purple Enel isn't tier 0 god tier deck in OP15 is because Borsalino, a 5-cost 6,000 power blocker that heals you, is so powerful into Enel. And so, in a weird way, I think that because Borsalino Quasar exists, it stops Enel from being like red-purple law level monster deck. It's hard to justify saying that like therefore Borsalino Quasar should exist. I think that both of those cards are a little bit overtuned, and so only hitting one of them would make the other one a problem. So in that sense, I kind of understand why Bandai may not have decided to touch it, but it still feels bad if you play something that's not like a Borsalino Quasar deck, basically.
Yeah, for me, the omission was surprising mainly because, okay, first of all, I think they should have just banned Rayquaza, because if you pair ban them, I don't think there's any deck that will include Rayquaza or Borsalino, and I think that's the case even for Vegapunk. So I think the solution is just to have the Rayquaza banned and just remove the illusion of choice. But yeah, it makes for some of the most frustrating experiences in playing the game. I mean, at all levels of the game, with how strong yellow has become, because the trend has been that they have started printing a lot more like actually good yellow cards that don't have the trigger line of text, they just have a good effect. And they use those effects to like pull ahead in the game, and now they just have this potential for highly resilient defense in just their live cards, like without even committing any cards from their hand. And there's a multitude ways to abuse this, which is Hiyori and Gloriosa, but also in blue yellow combination, like Boa can play the stack Boa and then know what's on top of the deck, and Borsalino put Rayquaza in. The most problematic one is just when you blind hit their life and it's Rayquaza and then bring a Borsa and heal. I just think those experiences in the game have been like the most frustrating for the players ever since Yellow was introduced in OP03. At least for that part, I think there should have been some balancing and tuning down of the power.
Zero cost event was a huge frustration, and now this is like all of that plus one level even higher. So I can understand people getting even more frustrated as things go along. But I am not entirely sure if the yellow decks will be as powerful as people say. Looking at a lot of the flagships in OP15, a lot of like Nami obviously doing very well, but it looks like a lot of Lucy and Purple and Nell also dominating despite the fact that yellow has this broken combination. So I'm curious how things are going to keep playing out and whether this Boris Quasar is just going to be a powerful yellow tool or just going to be the only thing that matters in the meta. So Bandai might just have the foresight to realize that it might be very, very strong and yellow might be very prevalent, but might not be the best deck even still.
Very interesting topic about like how the OP15 15 meta is going to actually end up. And I have my own theories, which maybe we'll get into a little bit. But I think that like right now we're in the process of building a triangle in OP15 where like, you know, the Borsalino decks beat NL and NL. I mean, NL versus Lucy's a little bit more gray. But I do think it's a little bit slightly favored for NL. But then you have Lucy that sort of beats these Borsalino decks, especially things like Nami. You know, just having good board control in OP15 is a bit rare, so having those sorts of decks are good. So we have this like kind of triangle meta that's forming, so therefore all three decks are performing to an extent. I mean, as I mentioned, like I understand why Borsalino Quasar may have still existed because it helps sort of make this triangle exist in the meta, but it feels very oppressive to play against. I also think that one thing that has been much more prevalent recently because of the way that the game's been shaping up is that a lot more games are going to time.
It seems like it's really easy for games to just go like 4 or 5 turns longer on average than they normally would, just because you don't really want to go for a game against these yellow decks, and decks like Lucy just like can just survive for a very long time. A absurd amount of card advantage, 9k blockers, it's like really hard to punch through all of that, with the exception of cards like Roger, of course. So I can see things going to time, and I'm not entirely sure if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but longer games are, for me in general, are pretty fun, but it does require a lot of time management skills that can be very, very difficult to kind of master, especially in the beginning of a format when you're just learning a lot of stuff. Decisions aren't as intuitive or natural, so things will just take forever.
Did you see the 3v3 at Bandai Card Game Fest, by the way? There was I don't remember who it was against, but it was Blue Yell Nami against Red Green Luffy in the top 8 match, I believe.
I did not watch this game, no.
Yeah, okay, so Red Green Luffy was in the driver's seat for the entire game. Like, he got 2 5-cust Sanjis bottom decked by Gravity Blade and was still ahead the entire game. And all Nami did the entire game was heal permanently, whether it's 5-cust Borsalino or the 8-cust Moria, and won through time. Because time rules, whoever has higher life ends up winning. And it went to time. They did the extra turns and Nami had more life. So Nami basically the entire game was never ahead, only healing, never really like made an advancement on the opponent's board because Red Green Luffy could also take back Nami's board. And the game ended because Nami had more life. And I mean, that's another thing, like just how Japanese, tournament rules work as well, where like having more life is very advantageous. So this Borsalino combo is also very good in that sense.
Has that always been the case, or did they change the rules from double loss?
It's double loss.
I think, right?
Yeah. So double loss is in the preliminary Swiss rounds, and then top cut they'll have the time rules, and then it goes life, deck size, and then rock paper scissors. But
I want to see a rock paper scissors in top cut so bad after the game.
I haven't had to do rock paper scissors once, but I had someone at a tournament I was at do a rock paper scissors once, and it was someone that I fought, so I really needed him to win that rock paper scissors for my match win percentage. So I could like barely sneak in, and he won it, and I got into the top 3 for the store qualifiers. That was my small victory. But other than that, I haven't seen it really go that far ever. But no, it's happening more and more recently, especially like right now. There's it's kind of a meme so far. I haven't seen anyone like actually try to pull it off, but there's a Black Yellow Moria combo where you drain your deck and then you infinitely Borsalino Quasar because you can keep refilling your deck over and over again and just make sure you never die. Because you can, You can play Borsellino. If you stack your deck, you can play Borsellino to stack Quasar into your life and just infinitely heal forever.
That might not be a meme. I might be having fun with that later.
There's a lot of fun things you can do if time rules didn't exist. But like I think especially I know that in the West it's like a little bit different how time rules work because like in Japan it's a lot less forgiving, especially in those Swiss stage rounds where you just get a double loss if it goes to time. One thing especially is that like the starving playstyle that used to be very good against yellow in that you don't let them trigger out their characters, you just focus on their board, is kind of it's not that it's impossible anymore, although a lot of decks disincentivize that, like Hancock or Yellow Luffy, for example. But because of how long games go on, if you try to starve the opponent, you're almost always going to go to time. So that decision is almost like non-existent right now.
Part of your description about that feature match where you just said like Nami wasn't really like doing anything the entire game and just healing, because that has been my impression of OP15 so far as well, where some games you feel like when you're playing against yellow, they're not really trying to play the game. They're just like playing heal cards over and over again. Effectively, the only real card they play that feels threatening is the Robin, because she has like a good stat line and a devastating effect. And otherwise, it just feels like they're trying to avoid playing the game as much as possible, because your deck can also generate advantage, but theirs is just like healing and trying to survive. And I think that type of playstyle is going to be very... like, people will need to get used to playing against it as soon as possible, just because historically in the game, the decks that did well were those that like were tests of patience. Because at some point, a lot of players just lose patience and said, okay, I'm all inning now. Like, because they just get like, they don't have the discipline to keep playing to actually win out the game. Which, to be fair, against the current power level of yellow, it might not be reliable and always possible. But it's definitely a falling of many people that they just all in way too early and they're like, oh man, this game has been going on, let's turn everything sideways and potentially just throw the game. So I think that will also be a factor in tournament play as soon as OP15 starts for us.
Yeah, I mean, but also like there's the thing, it happens a lot in Japan, I don't know about like the West, but like when you have like 1 minute left on the clock and you feel like you need to play another turn to like guarantee lethal, but you feel like you have to go for lethal because of how long the game's been going on, I just feel like the game feels a lot more limited in how you're allowed to play it when games are expected to go on for like minimum 20 plus minutes when you're fighting against a yellow deck. But yeah, I mean, really, I mean, this kind of all wraps back to just like yellow healing in general. You know, there's the 4-cost Zoro now, which is just a 4-cost heal. And back in the day when we first got 6-cost Kuma, that was the cheapest heal we had, and that was crazy. And then before then, they were all like 8, 9, 10-cost heals and whatnot. So just healing is getting cheaper and cheaper for yellow. And then alongside all this healing that's come into the game, we've had board removal in yellow come back as well with things like Kingdom Come or Raigo, depending on which platform you use. But just in general, Enel, I'm not sorry, I just called you Enel, Jonas, as
So I don't think yellow control, the way that I used to play it, is particularly functional. And I don't think the yellow Enel leader kind of holds up compared to the power of what exists right now. Mostly just because the other yellow decks have such powerful ways to build resilient boards, which is one of Enel's like original weaknesses. Like Enel's weakness was if your opponent just keeps like 5 and 6ing your board by kind of barraging your cards out of hand, they can very easily like run you out of resources because of that. But because of decks like Boa kind of having the supplemental like ways to protect your board, and also the card advantage, as well as like decks like the new Yellow Luffy that can just make sure your board just never dies to combat. It's like really hard to try to play something that's like very yellow control heavy like Enel. But I do think that Nami kind of takes the spearhead for like the default yellow control deck, where it's just a bunch of resilient, obnoxious units that your opponent or characters that your opponent can't really deal with in combat, while also just making sure this deck can never survive. And I do think Raigo might have a home there now that Red Rock is going to be rotating relatively soon. So I do think that's kind of where my head's at in terms of seeing can you play yellow Nami and just be this full control deck, and how good is that going to be? So I'm excited to mess around with that, but I don't think that many other yellow decks kind of have that ability at the moment. So that's one thing that's sad, but I do think it's like still going to be very exciting and very powerful.
Yeah, we kind of skipped over the other parts of the ban list, which kind of overlapped.
Oh, yeah.
There was the Kingdom Come Unban and Jimbe.
Yep.
And yeah, Kingdom Come, I'm not sure if I see it having that much impact. Jonas, you did mention the Blue Yellow Nami, which I think is fair. Like that deck is going to be good just by virtue of it being good against other yellow decks. That's like going to be a huge factor in why it's going to be very prominent at like every tournament pretty much. Until the next set or next balance or something changes. It feels weird to say, but I played the deck in Heroing Cups and I kind of like playing it, not gonna lie. Like among all the yellow decks, it does have some of that modularity in the turn structure that I felt like most of the other yellow decks were lacking, unless they were like very aggro focused, like green yellow, and I guess black yellow Luffy because that was almost entirely yellow deck. But yeah, I'm not sure. Kingdom Come is weird. It's like expensive, way more limited, and all the aggressive yellow decks that like healing don't necessarily like using it as a tool just because it's more fitting for those decks that actually want to play on low life, which I don't think is the case for almost any of the yellow decks now, with the exception of maybe Bonnie.
That's the main thing, is that like you need to be at 1 life to use that card, and like unless you're pairing it with Forecast Porcelain or something on the same turn, unless your leader is NL, for example, or like yellow NL, it's very difficult to actually play that card and also survive the next turn, just with how a lot of the decks function. So if you want to use that card well, you have to basically be a deck that can heal on the same turn or make your leaders 7k/9k, like Blue Yellow Nami or like Red Yellow Bonnie, like Hrvoje mentioned. So I think also there is the new OP15, I don't know what everyone's calling it, Bell Luffy, Golden Luffy, who also has the Sky Island engine sort of innately built into his kit, so makes Raigo or / Kingdom Come searchable as well, and also has control over when he can take his life. Just if the opponent hits into you, you take your life. If the opponent hits into your board, you still take your life. So it makes it very easy to use, but whether or not you can actually like survive the turn after that kind of needs to still be seen. But I do think that those are kind of the only decks that can really use Raigo. So then I think that by extension, like compared to a card like Red Rock, it's not as influential. It's not problematic. It wasn't even problematic when it was banned, honestly. We were very confused when it was banned. I think that like in a way our first All Blue episode was us talking about why did they ban Raigo, where did Jinbei go, all that stuff. I think that the thing that was weird for me about that card was that like it felt like the reason why they banned Raigo but not Red Rock was because Red Rock was going to rotate out and they wanted those sorts of cards out of the game. But then just as Red Rock is rotating out, they bring Raigo back in. And it felt very like confusing to me, conflicting on like what they've said on why they decided to get rid of Raigo in the first place.
I also didn't understand that conflicting like story about why they banned it in the first place. But I just think for the most part they probably just didn't want a card on the ban list they didn't think would very likely see play. And I just don't think it'll see much play in the format, just because I don't think it really has a natural home, and it kind of conflicts with a lot of what Yellow wants to do in this meta, which is kind of use its life as a way to kind of manage a lot of very large swings from decks like Anel, from decks like Lucy, from a bunch of 9k swings, and wanting to be at this like 2 to 3 life a lot of the time. And if that's the case, Raigo can just be this like really awkward liability, especially when a lot of units or a lot of characters are really like resilient to removal, like both 6-cost NLs, like mostly are like the main ones that you can just be like, okay, let's just not even worry about this 6-cost Raigo card because it doesn't even matter.
I 100% agree. Like in this current meta, I don't think that Raigo is like a problem at all. It's just like, you know, if Red Blue Ace comes back, then it's a little bit significant because it's like, it's in a way a Red Rock that Red Blue Ace can't use that can affect Red Blue Ace. So makes the Red Blue Ace mirrors a little bit different, makes yellow versus Red Blue Ace, which is generally, for the most part, just because your leader's 6k, sometimes 8k, more favored towards Red Blue Ace. So maybe shifts the dynamic of some of those matchups if they become more prevalent. But right now, you know, with things like especially NL at the top of the meta, makes it a lot more difficult to really justify adding in that card at like a significant number of copies into your deck. We'll see how the meta develops, especially with like OP16. Maybe they'll bring back some sorts of a decent removal. But I think especially with the meta moving a lot more away from like Yellow Luffy and NL and more towards Blue Yellow Nami and Lucy, then like maybe some of those cards can be a little bit more relevant.
Anything to make Emu a less like absurd powerhouse, I'm kind of honestly happy. Despite the fact that I love playing black decks, I love Emu, and Emu is one of the most interesting decks I've ever played. I just don't think that you want Emu to be a tier 0 deck that often. So I'm glad it's kind of getting a lot of kind of like innate hate with a lot of the more powerful decks that exist in the format.
Yeah, he also gets a decent amount of hate from like the less powerful, like kind of random decks popping up. I'm pretty sure Black Yellow Luffy now beats Emu rather reliably by just cruising on high life and being 9k every turn. But yeah, I generally do agree. The format developments are going to be interesting just because I think people will have to like kind of rediscover the bag of tricks that they can use now that a lot of the old tools have rotated. Like some decks lost like really their powerhouses, and they just need to. They might not even be playable anymore. Like Bonnie losing the Tenko's Doffy is the biggest one I can think of on the spot. But yeah, there's more examples of that, and people just need to like try and find the decks from set 5 onwards, because rotation like eliminated so many potential strong cards that are currently being played, and that might have changed the meta.
Me randomly, as someone who's been menaced by Mihawk a lot in the past couple of sets, I'm just glad that both Paradise Waterfall and Spiderweb are rotating, so I can actually address some of these rested characters with cards like Gamma Knife. So I'm happy.
Round table anymore?
I can live with not having round table. I can find ways to remove a rested 9k otherwise.
There's a lot of, I mean, I've been looking through like the card list, especially recently with rotation around the corner. And like, you know, there's some cards like Radical Beam and whatnot that have felt like very significant in the past are now going to be rotating out. But then I looked through the card lists, and like we actually have like reasonable substitutions for them. Like there's the Supernova one where like if there's an 8k on the board, then it's plus 4k. Yeah, it's a something counterattack. There's also Thunder Bagua is another one that's like rotating out, which felt significant for UP Luffy. But there's a Doflamingo event in OP14, which if the opponent has a 6k character or higher, then you get the ramp off of the plus 4k. So similar sorts of things. I'm sure that in some ways we'll feel the effects of rotation, especially with lots of removal being disappeared. That was weird English, but you know, round table, Red Rock, even things like the 9-cost Mihawk, for example, in blue, a card that has been coming back a little bit in OP15 before rotation, just as like a blue-yellow Nami answer to red-blue Sable, for example, because that 7-cost Sable, very big body, very difficult to get rid of. I'm sure that we'll feel it in some ways, but in other ways, I think that they've made the transition a little bit more easy for us, in a way.
I would agree. I'm not going to miss 8-cost Kid.
I think when they first announced that rotation was going to come, I was like, oh, don't get rid of 8-cost Kid. But then now I'm like, please get rid of 8-cost Kid.
Hrvoje does like him, though.
Ironic, because it is the card that Yellow specifically has probably the hardest time dealing with, because they still don't have a way to reliably power reduce, right?
Yeah, you would need to run something like the 4-cost S-Snake or something, which is a little bit weird.
Yeah. He's safe for now.
Yeah, I think just Red-Green Law with the 5-cost X-Drake as well as the 8-cost Kid felt very oppressive a lot of the times, because just like completely unremovable board or behind this 8k monster. Just in that way, I'm happy that the card's kind of gone. I'm glad that it got a little bit of a last hurrah, especially like, you know, in the West. It's been a little bit more prevalent than it was in the East. So happy to see Red-Green Law make a little bit of a comeback towards the end. 8-cost Kid, very influential deck, very significant to the history of the game, but not one that I'm going to be too sad to see go. Yeah, there is a card that we are kind of just jumping around everywhere, but a card that we haven't talked about all too much that was unbanned as well is blue 4-cost Jinbe, which another card which we were a little bit surprised when it was actually banned. Kind of brought back for Blue Doflamingo, who's also going to be rotated out very soon. So can this card be used in any other deck, or is this kind of just a extra regulation Dofi buff?
I think it's just the latter. It feels like, from my experience, OP15 doesn't look against the 4-cost meta. And I think a lot of what OP15, about all Dofi wanted to do was just interact with, or at least 4-cost Jinbei decks, were just interact with people with playing 4-cost, specifically 4-cost Law. And because that doesn't happen, like, I just don't see any appeal in playing Jinbei. The blue Jinbei deck seems fine in a lot of this meta, but without putting to kind of punish a lot of decks from taking a few too many early swings, it loses a lot of its luster. And decks like Forecast or Blue Boa from like a couple of sets back also just seems relatively underpowered compared to the rest of the meta, especially once it loses Red Rock. So maybe it has a home in extra regulation, but for the most part, I just don't see Forecast Jinbei having a home that really makes him powerful just because of what the format looks like, which is a lot of 5+ cost characters.
He's like a swarm option, but the decks that can make use of him, like they have other problems to solve in the meta, which Jinbei doesn't solve. Because, for example, the green blue Zoro Sanji can run it because he can play the 3-cost Mihawk, and then you can just on turn on for dawn you can just explode with like Jinbei Mihawk Weevil or something if you're on the 7 Warlords engine, and you can in theory like run well, I guess in Old Boy doesn't make much sense. And not just that, like that part is sort of manageable, but just ways to deal with like 5k or 6k bodies, both through removal and through like indirect means where you just freeze them or don't allow them to rest.
I wanted Jinbei to be good again, but I don't think that's going to be happening anytime soon. Unless they print some other broken forge up to put in play with him. But if that's the case, then why unban Jinbei?
I think it's possible. You know, I think especially because all of the old blue warlords are going to be rotating out, and it seems like recently with the new sets, they've been kind of revisiting old sets in a way. Like OP15 in a way felt a lot like a repeat of OP04. Like we had new Dressrosa leaders. We had, I feel like there's more, I'm not thinking about it right now, but I had like a better comparison before. In OP16, a lot of the leaders are very similar to the OP02 leaders. Like we have Impel Down coming back, we have Paramount War coming back and whatnot. So I think that like eventually we'll get some like very relevant and very solid targets for Jinbei that'll make him shine, even if just for a couple of months. And we'll just need to see what deck can actually fully utilize that in the standard regulation.
Like the rest of the bans or unbans don't really make sense for us, right? Because at least if we're focusing on standard regulation, because all the other ones we're going to be rotating immediately. It's like, is it Great Eruption, Ice Age, Ennis Lobby, Moby Dick? Those are the 4?
Yeah, I think so. And I think those were also like announced a little while back. So nothing like groundbreaking. Although it seems like a lot of people didn't know about that. So I guess for the people who are watching and didn't know, those are banned. Those are unbanned.
The prison in Impel Down.
I think the only Block 1 card that remained banned was OP03 Nami Leader. And everything else is Block 2 or higher, so we'll have to see like next year if they come back out of Impel Down.
Kabaji get unbanned?
But yeah, Kabaji's been unbanned for like a couple. Everyone forgets. He's been free for a while, but no one's cared.
And no one really cared about him anyways.
I kind of wish they kept him banned just as like a relic of the past, but it makes sense they want to keep the ban list a bit clean.
Do you guys want to transition the conversation a little bit more about OP15? I'm not entirely sure if you guys have spent much time on it. I have not, to be completely frank, just because I was focusing on this brief, weird OP14 meta with EBO4 in the English game. But how has OP15 been treating you, Kai? I mean, you already made a video about your 200 plus games, but for the people that haven't watched it or need a quick summary, how has that been for you?
Yeah, well, that video is already a little bit outdated, so I am going to like work on getting another one out. But to set the stage, the beginning of OP15 was like lots of NL. Just NL is destroying everything. NL is a crazy deck. It beats every deck that exists under Sun. And then people realized like Boa's still good, so it was Boa and NL for a while, and then the game was really, as it is in every set, is there a deck that can beat these two decks? And most of the time the answer is no. So people end up just getting very good at these two decks, and then they sort of settle into the top of the meta. But this time, for the first time in quite a while, the answer was yes. There was a deck that can beat both Hancock as well as Enel, and actually very convincingly, and that was Blue Yell Nami. Blue Yell Nami, a deck that you would assume loses really hard to Enel just due to the fact that Enel's characters are 10k power, actually beats Enel really hard just due to the fact that your leader being 7k denies all of the smaller attacks from Enel. Those 5k, 6k, sometimes 7k swings are much easier to counter out of if your leader is Nami, as well as having the resources from your leader effect. On top of that defense of being able to deny like half of Enel's kit in a way, because although the 6-cost Enels are huge, the smaller attacks are what's really, really annoying for the deck. The survivability given to you from the 5-cost Sporcelino, and then by extension things like Quasar into the 5-cost Sporcelino, have been really, really difficult for Enel to actually get over, meaning that Nami, now the big threat of OP15, and then now people are trying to scramble to sort of, we're in that process of finding now what beats Nami, and for now the answer is Lucy. So the top 4 decks essentially are Nami, Lucy, Enel, and then Hancock has been sort of faltering a little bit. And in my opinion, although we have talked a little bit about Ema falling off a little bit in the meta, I do think that Ema gets a lot better once rotation and the bans hit. And I think that Ema, although very hard losing into purple Enel, there's ways to fight that matchup, but it's still very difficult. With Pudding gone, you know, the Hancock matchup's good. The Lucy matchup, surprisingly, despite the event, is also good for Ema. Nami matchup's also, like, historically been fine as well. So my prediction for OP15 is that Ema's going to make a bit of a comeback, but otherwise, these are the 4 main decks.
It's a pretty good summary. I was hoping that BY Luffy would have like a semblance of a playability. I really want to mess around with that deck. I know Hrvoje has been the front runner of playing that deck, but it seems really exciting, and I want to mess around with that deck more. And it seems like becoming a very large leader can really invalidate a lot of what the early aggression looks like from a lot of these decks. So hopefully,
yeah, most importantly, there's no pudding to deny when you just go to big hand size. But I think a few things will influence this upcoming format for us, or like 2 rather big changes in playstyle. And I already like mentioned / hinted at the first one, which is if you want, you can like take, and keep a really large hand size if you're confident that there is no like ways for the opponent to just insta kill you through like Roger or something. And what that entails indirectly is that decks which have more modular like cards, they get to shine more because they can abuse different synergies to like just outplay their opponents, because they have this ability to combine cards and just, you know, the sum is greater. I'm forgetting what the saying is, but like when you have parts and you have the combined thing is greater than the sum of its parts.
Yeah,
Which is like what decks like Sakazuki and Red Purple did, where you have these, and it's kind of what Enel does, because Enel functions on the same principle where a lot of your cards are like very low investment, or basically 0 investment free in playing them out during the turn, and then you use them to take care of bigger cards, and for that reason, Lucy sort of appeals to me quite a bit, because it's a deck that has board control options to deal with yellow on KOs and yellow. Like, you can bottom deck Borsellino, and that removes it out of the crazy rotation. So if you do like two copies, like now they need a third one, and that's not that easy to guarantee in these yellow decks, which only run the Borsellino Rayquazer engine to like see it, not to search for it, but just to see it and hopefully draw it and then set it up. And that type of control, to me, sounds very interesting, especially if you can just take, and there's no fear of pudding and just dying, as long as you can like counter out of a really big swing, or maybe just float around on 1 life. And then it still has removal options, which can deal with bigger bodies, which decks can play or present, like the Tankos Newgate and whatnot. And most importantly, it has the other major difference in playstyle I think will be introduced, which is dealing with opposing bodies indirectly, where you do not kill them, do not remove them from the board, but you just incapacitate them. Either by freezing them, as green decks can do, or Enel with Lightning Dragon. I'm forgetting the name of the event. The one that freezes a 6K. Or you can reduce their power for your and opponent's turn with like cards like the Fire Fist, the Rayleigh, whatever. And that's like the other part, but you find a way to deal with the opposing board without killing it, because against some decks you can straight up not kill the board. There's no way to pretty much kill the Secret Luffy, because if you reduce it with some character, usually it's gonna be 4K at most, and then they just take or counter, and then they heal all that back up, so they keep the board. So you straight up need to reduce it to like 1K or 2K and hit it with your searchers for it to die, and you cannot do that without events. And if you use event, you do not reduce it because of his ability, unless you get really lucky. So yeah, I think those will be 2 very big playstyle differences that influence how the meta shapes up, and for that reason I'm most excited for Lucy, as I said. But yeah, Enel has felt strong in testing. I haven't played around with yellow enough yet, and there's so many things I want to try out with like yellow plus something decks. But yeah, I think I agree with your assessment. The deck I think might be most underestimated is actually Black Yellow Moria, though. That was a long rant. I'll let Jonas have it so I can take a few breaths.
Yeah, you're good. I'm super excited to ask more about Black Yellow Moria. I'll ask that in private once you've actually built the deck and kind of destroyed everyone with it. But I do think that the couple things that I really want to mess with is mainly actually just Lucy. I think a lot of people have been like really excited about it. I know a lot of people on Twitter have been like really enjoying that deck. But I want to see if there's any more deck building space in Nami to see like what else we can do. I imagine people have explored it plenty, but the Thriller Bark package is obviously very, very strong. But I thought there might be some extra tech cards that we might be able to mess around with in that deck. And thankfully, Nami has the very obnoxious leader effect of discarding a card to become a 7K, which one gives you the ability to just like play absurd bricks and like very niche cards and not really have like a huge downside in playing them because you can always just use them to leader effect, which has been very historically powerful in decks like BY and Sokka, obviously, and Emu. But also, you just have infinite time. So these like very grindy, slow cards that might give you an edge in a lot of matchups might be very prevalent, especially now that Red Rock is gone. So I'll look through the card pool, see what other absurd 9s and 10s or 8s, 9s, and 10s we can play in Nami and see how good they can be. So that's the other thing that I really want to mess around with and see how good it is.
It has a lot of different versions that I haven't fully tested, but from my testing, I don't necessarily agree with the Thriller Bark version. I think that like really the Thriller Bark version does one thing well, and it's heal. Basically, it's just stall time forever, and that's good if you're fighting against a deck like Enel or Hankook that's eventually just going to burn out their resources at some point, where eventually like either, I mean, Boa of course can just play down the 9-cost Boa and like try to win the game through that means, but you have so many resources that's very difficult to actually break through without a card like Pudding. Losing Pudding in that matchup is very, very devastating. And then like Enel as well, with the 8-cost Moria package and the 4-cost Perona, which can lock a 6K, 6-cost NL kind of out of the game, which makes that really, really difficult to deal with as well. But even if you don't run the Thriller Bark package, it's not necessarily like those matchups are flipped in the other direction. They're still fine for Nami. It's just maybe not like you can just like close your eyes and like choose a card from your hand and like throw it out and it's like, oh, I guess I healed this turn and like that's good enough. There's like the sort of standard version of Nami that's historically run things like 8-cost Kid, which is pretty good in the mirror, especially when you're both using Borsellino Quasars at each other to be able to burn the opponent's Quasar, for example. It's like good mirror. There's also most Nami decks recently have been teching in, regardless of the version that they're playing, the 10-cost Newgate once again to deal with the mirror, to create bigger boards because bigger is better, especially with Red Rock disappearing. And then there's one that hasn't been seen all too much, although from my testing I kind of understand why it hasn't been seen all too much, and that is the Sky Island Nami as well, because the 7-cost Robin from OP15 that you draw 1 life, heal 1, and then you play out a 5-cost Sky Island. I mean, the life interaction specifically made for Blue Yellow Nami to get that heal or the draw off of your leader effect is a good way to expand your board out, because that's not something that Blue Yellow Nami otherwise has the capability to do. The main thing is just how do you find the timing to play out these characters while also finding the time to attach Dong onto your leader, which can make things a little bit awkward, but I do think that these are like the 3 main interesting ways that you can play Nami, and I don't think that we've really found the correct version quite yet, or like the correct ratios at the very least.
Makes sense. I really did like exactly 8-cost Moria in Nami, but I didn't really like any of the other stuff when I was initially testing it, especially in the current format, because I also think it's a fine deck right now. So the fact that there's still a lot more room to explore is really exciting.
The main advantage of 10-cost Newgate is just like the bigger guy wins in the mirror, so it's just like too abusable, because even when there was Red Rock, and I guess in Japan, while they play, there still is Red Rock, like, he kind of comes down as a 6-cost because you attach the Dawn. You obviously wouldn't want to attach all those Dawn always, but sometimes you would, and then he's effectively 6/12 that replaced himself in hand already, and potentially even got the block, depending on how the turns were structured. I might be stupid. I wanted to somehow segue into Calgara, but I'm forgetting what the point I was trying to make was. I remember what the segue was supposed to be, and it was kind of that Yellow, with all the new tools it has been given, like its cards that don't have trigger, they just have a good effect. And kind of combined with the new leader effects made Yellow inherit like a lot of the playstyle traits of other colors, where now it has really good tempo options, which was like usually the case with Black, though it doesn't necessarily rely on removal, but it does still have cards like Idatsu and the newly unbanned Raigo. And it has a lot more aggro tools, which, historically has always been red, maybe purple options, but now it also has like a very, very strong number of defensive options, which I think it used to be the green that had the best ones. So it does feel like yellow is now more interesting in the sense that if you want to play yellow, you're not restricting yourself to what used to be a rather one-dimensional playstyle. Have all these options, but at the expense of the fact that it was because yellow got all these really strong cards. And to be fair, they seem to be moving in a similar design direction with black, but they're just not up to the power level with those cards yet. But they are kind of giving black the variety of different effects, like Crocodile has the minus power, for example, and various other toolbox effects.
I think I agree with that. Like yellow, I don't know if you guys actually know, but I was in the Bandai card game 3v3, Card Game Fest 3v3, and I brought Moria to that, Black Yellow Moria. And, I think that there's a lot of ways you can take Moria. The deck that I ran didn't actually run the 5-cost Borsalino, and was a little bit more aggressive in the way that it played, just because, like, I wanted more triggers, essentially. And Moria, like, if you put in, like, the 5-cost Borsalino, like, also that deck abuses the 4-cost Zoro really, really well, because the 6-cost Moria can play out any 4-cost. The 8-cost Moria trigger also plays out any 4-cost, so the 4-cost Zoro is very, very strong in that deck, so you'd probably be playing the 5-cost Borsalino on top of that. But, like, especially in a deck like Moria, with the exact same cards, the exact same deck list, you can choose to be very, very aggressive, or you could be very, very defensive and, like, play the slow game, even without 5-cost Borsalino. And I think that, like, those sorts of things make it really dynamic and really fun, which is part of the reason why I brought Moria, just because it's a really fun deck, and I was falling asleep while I was trying to play Nami, for example. But like as Hrvoje mentioned, things like Karagara as well also have some of those sort of levers that you can pull in terms of aggression, speed, like how fast you want to actually close out the game, how much you want to play defensively. Comparing the 5-cost Bomburan Norando with the 5-cost Borsalino is a little bit sad, but I guess if you're Karagara, you can run both, so that's something too.
I think it's a funny parallel to draw, because before, a couple sets back, people were complaining about purple being so, like, kind of weirdly meshing these color identities, where, like, you just put Dawn -1 on a character and now you could just do red things or black things or red thing or green things all of a sudden, which is, like, kind of ridiculous. And now it feels like yellow is like, okay, take a life and we can kind of do things in other colors as well. Right. So it's not exactly that case, and I do think it's, like, not really a fair argument, but I do think it's a funny kind of relationship that's kind of going on.
It does feel like it's getting to that point. If we just have a little bit more power reduction, then maybe we'll get there.
True. More S-Snake kind of effects.
Yeah. We just need, like, a yellow, like, take 1 life and reduce one of the opponent's characters by 10,000.
Are you sure it doesn't exist?
It could.
No, that does remind me of one of my favorite cards, or, like, the cards I'm most sad to see go in rotation is the Gum Gum Bell.
A lot of those, like, weird block 1 cards, like, I think especially, like, I actually made, like, a whole list of cards that are, like, kind of significant, but, like, in block 1 there's a lot of cards, like, before color identity really felt like set in stone. Like red particularly had the 2-cost Sanji always as a tool to be able to be, like, anti-starving. If you ever starved as a red deck, you could play down the 2-cost Sanji to start grabbing your life, and also it's a 7k attacker on the next turn. And so, like, losing those sorts of cards, and then, I think Gum Gum Bell is a little bit more of a Hrvoje special card, but, like, having those way to, like, get out of uncomfortable situations is something that will be missed a little bit. There's lots of, like, weird, quirky cards in block 1, especially before they, like, really understood how to balance the game, that will be missed. I'm also, in general, a little bit disappointed that, like, some of those tech cards, like that 9-cost Mihawk, that's, like, come and gone with the meta, especially with, like, Blue-Purple Luffy, has been a little bit more popular. A card that, like, seems like it's finally good now isn't going to be usable because of rotation. That's a little bit sad to me.
I'm gonna miss the 9-cost Mihawk. He's been kind of either very, very good or very unplayable depending on the meta, which is, like, very fun.
Yeah, but if you're Nami, though, you can just throw it away for a free 2k, so that's kind of the Nami dilemma.
It's actually quite interesting that there's this contrast between two of the, I assume it will be the most popular decks in the meta, where Enno, when you deck build him, he's kind of pre-made. Like, I mentioned several times I don't like this, but you kind of get pretty much everything out of it. It's like 40 cards, I think, are pretty much set in stone, and then you have the Pudding, the Sanji, and the like, Archer, which are like cards not from OP15, and like all the flexibility of the deck, all the interesting things in the game plan and decision making come from inside the game. Whereas with yellow decks, there's this interesting contrast now where you have all these deck building options, but once you do build a deck, it does feel like they're much more limited in scope in how their turns actually play out. I think Blue Yellow Nami is like maybe more of an exception to that than others, just because she can run a lot of two costs with various flexible effects. But yeah, I thought that was like an interesting contrast to point out in the upcoming meta.
I actually didn't think about that, but I mean, talking about all of the two costs in Blue Nami, it is funny that one of the cards that's going to be surviving rotation is actually a card that's like somewhat problematic, maybe not as relevant right now, but the 2-cost Nojiko, specifically in Nami, just a 2-cost bounce of 5-cost, especially in this meta. Like, it hasn't seen that much play, which I'm a little bit surprised by, but just like into a lot of decks, being able to bounce a 5-cost for very cheap is just very solid in my opinion. So, I mean, hard to make space if you're running the Thriller Bark package, but especially if you're running like the more standard version of Nami, where you don't have to run those Hogbacks and Peronas and 8-cost Morias. There's a lot of interesting deck building space in Nami that I think, especially like, as a Nami player, very interesting to put together the deck, but then also like playing against Nami, you have to figure out very quickly what version you're going to be playing against to understand like what are the odds of them having some of these weird tech cards.
I'm trying to think if I want to talk about this. I was thinking about this right now. I'm worried about what Red's role is going to be in the upcoming One Piece meta. So Red decks have existed, specifically Ace and Lucy, but in my mind, they're not really Red decks. They're just like a bunch of blue cards and like a little bit of like searching and like a little bit of card reduction, basically, or power reduction. And I felt like Red decks haven't really existed since Rayleigh, and I just don't really feel like they can exist in the current meta because of how powerful Yellow is, especially Borsellino. So I was just curious if you guys had any thoughts on like what they would have to do to Red as a core to make Red decks, like predominantly Red decks, even functional in this current metagame or any future metagames.
I think that one of the big issues with Red is that it's kind of lost its identity, or that like all the other colors have sort of taken its identity. Like Red used to be the power reduction color and the power-based removal color, and it's still like the best at that, but it's like also supposed to be the aggressive color, but most other colors do aggression better than Red now. And then also there's like Dome Attachment was uniquely a Red mechanic back in like OP01 with things like the start deck Nami to be able to attach one Rested Dome to a character or leader, which I mean a bunch of other colors can do now. So I think that like to save Red, I guess in a sense, they would need to sort of refocus on those and like give you a reason to play Red. And I think that like if you take a little sneak peek at OP16, there's the new Red Ace Leader, which is very, very aggro focused, being able to give your characters with I believe 8k power or higher rush on the turn that they're played. But I do want to see more like proper Red control decks, because I think that like power reduction and power based removal is something that like Red players have always fantasized about with things like Shanks to an extent, but haven't really ever been fully realized.
So I think the problem with Red's identity has been more about Bandai's refusal to like move it away from small units, because small units are not really efficient. Like we see what keeps becoming like the most efficient, like what's most efficient in the meta. It's always decks with like good 4, 6, 5, 7 units. These vanilla stat lines that have some good effect on top, and that has been the trend for a while. And the few Red decks that have like played on the aggro side and actually had meta relevance did have units like that. For example, currently it's Red Green Low with the X-Drake because it has protection. It's like the vanilla stat line. It has a relevant effect on top. Like that's all the stuff you want to ask for. And then before that we had Smoker in OP10, which was Red Green, but it kind of shared the usual attributes of Red, where you don't have ways to generate advantage like inherently in the engine. So you're just playing the typical Red game. And other than that, the only decks that have Red decks that have been relevant were like those that have supplemented Red's lack of card advantage with the color that produces card advantage in in blue, which is what both Ace and Lucy do. Like the last time we had the true red control deck was Shanks in OP9, OP10. And to be fair, he now does have quite a few tools to actually maybe play a decent control game because of like even the starter deck Shanks, like the 9 cost might be relevant now that there is like all the 6 cost 10k NLs, like people are taking the 6 cost Boa. There's a lot more big units that could maybe enable it on the curve and make the leader 7k. So there might be something for Shanks there. But yeah, the point is, what Red needs is a leader designed around these medium-sized characters, which actually allow it to generate advantage. Like the type of support that Red Uta got, but for an actual leader with a good effect. Because like the 5/7 Uta is such a good card, such an insane card, but it's for Uta, so it doesn't really mean much. I think that's the type of stuff Red would need to like push itself back to the forefront of being the premier aggro deck. Because to me, it doesn't make sense that, for example, Yellow has the 7 Robin into 5/7 Luffy, and before that it had the Stussy into Egghead 5/7.
Yeah.
Like those combos, I don't know why Yellow got them and Red didn't. When Red is much more limited with the bodies and card advantage it gets to play with compared to Yellow.
I do think that that's actually one of like the key things, like especially I think one leader that we were all a little bit excited for OP15 that ended up not being very good was Krieg. I think that like one of the reasons why Krieg wasn't good was because although like his cards are very good on paper, it's just that like Red innately, but also like specifically Krieg, just doesn't have very good ways to accumulate resources, and that's very important in this meta. And then so the reason why like certain red decks have been very good and also yellow decks have been very good is because like the red decks that are good, like Ace or like Lucy, are decks that have card draw built into their leader effect to be able to combat on this plane of resources, and yellow decks, just by virtue of healing life, that extra life acts as extra cards to hand as well as extra counter in a way. So I think that just really the name of the game is resources right now, and red just for one reason or another refuses to have any sort of cards that can draw cards.
Yeah, I would agree that like the red card draw probably needs to exist in some way, shape, or form. Maybe it needs to be like some other, not exactly card draw, but some other way to innately get card advantage, which would be really nice. One thing I was thinking about is maybe just kind of shifting Banish's color identity to be more red than yellow. That might be a good way to kind of help supplement like Red's like lack of playability into a lot of these yellow decks, and it kind of makes sense in a lot of ways for Banish to be a little bit more red. And one thing that I have noticed in other card games that might fit Red's identity is more of a the phrase from Magic is like hate bears, but a lot of like very preventative units that can kind of stop your opponent from doing things that are generally advantaged against red. So like getting an advantage whenever your opponent plays something like a 10 drop or higher, like something like Koala, or punishing your opponent from gaining a life by giving you an extra advantage might be something that might be really powerful in red. So that's the kind of something I might want to see moving forward to kind of give red a little bit more power, by kind of also making it still like powerful aggressive deck that could still hang with a lot of these yellow decks that have been dominating the format.
Oh no, I want to suggest some types of graveyard effects, like small units that can revive from grave, like small units, like 1, 3, or 2, 4, under specific conditions, but maybe that's dangerous. I just saw some spoilers for another card game today, and I got inspired, like, well, why doesn't Red in this game have that? It would be nice.
I do think it's I mean, thematically it makes sense, but I do think that it's a bit of a shame that like black's the only color that can summon from your trash, just because every other color that has this sort of
Yellow? Hello?
Oh, we're Quasar.
oh, I mean, yeah, I'm sorry. This is a bit of an exception, but I meant these sorts of like Moria type effects, you know, like because the 7 Costa Robin summons from hand, Luffy Taro summons from hand. Is there a green version? I'm not exactly sure. But like all these types of effects summon from hand, so you need to be able to make sure that you actually have... Oh yeah, even Lucy, for example. Lucy has the 7 cost Lucy into the 4 cost event that'll play out a 4 cost Dressrosa type character from your hand, for example. So like in a way, every deck right now has a sort of like 8 cost Moria type effect. You know, Emu's the most extreme example of that. And Red just has like no way of expanding board except for like just playing out your characters, and I mean that's going to burn your hand very quickly. Those characters don't necessarily regenerate any resources in your hand, So yeah, I mean, for red to be good, I think mainly they just need to figure out some way to address the resource problem, even if it's just something like, like a decently statted character that has like an on attack effect and rush that draws you a card or something. Just something simple, I think, could help the deck in some way. I don't think that's going to be enough, but I think it's a start.
But Bandai is definitely scarred by those first 3 sets of One Piece, where set 2 and 3 were like 90% red, or so it felt at least.
Yeah.
Before people complained about Giant, they complained about Black, and before they complained about Black, it was all about that radical meme.
I know it was a bit different for you guys, but the Japanese OP03 meta was just Whitebeard, Red Ace, and Red Zoro. So like, it was very overwhelming back then. And then like when they made like Blue Black Rebecca, I was like, oh, finally something that's not red that's playable. But then like, it's been 3 years. I think we can make red a little bit better now.
It just has a lot of that baggage that they're probably too afraid to touch in design. But I just think the swarm options make the most sense. Like swarming card generation, the type that 5/7 Uta provides for sadly irrelevant decks. Actually, I'm not sure if she works for Shanks as well. I feel like maybe she does work for Red Haired Pirates.
I think you need to be Uta.
Yeah, I think it's exactly Uta leader.
Well, maybe I'm mixing up her effect with the 9-cost Shanks then, because then he also works for Uta. Yeah, has to be Uta only.
I'm just in the Sengoku waiting room.
Oh my god, I'm so excited to talk about that. Sorry, my camera's being a bit funky today.
To be fair though, I'm not that big of a fan of Emo right now. The deck feels like way more NPC to play, and that annoys me. Like I hate that mirrors are not like actual resource wars. It's just like you have to make an informed decision, a calculated risk.
Yeah.
And then if you lose, you post that meme of the crow that's like, yeah, it was a calculated risk I took, but man, I suck at math. So like, yeah, you assume they have Tenkos, you assume they have grounded.
It feels a little bit like the Sakazuki mirror when Moria was introduced, where it's kind of like it used to be very resource war intensive. Maybe like a real Sakazuki player will have like more opinions on this than I do. But like when I was playing Sakazuki in OP05, I felt like I was winning this war of attrition. Whereas in OP06, when Moria came out, it felt like a lot of it just came down to who had more Morias. So yeah. I get that sense for sure. A lot of these aren't going to be very relevant, but I have made a list of every single searcher, and at least in my opinion, every single important 2K that's going to be rotating out. And I'll be honest, there aren't all too many significant searchers, because I think like searches are another very important thing to like look at with rotation. What packages are going to be less consistent, I guess. And like a lot of these searchers, we have some like really random ones like the 3-cost Film Nami, or like the 2-cost Igaramu, for example, for Vivi. But we also have some decent ones like the 1-cost Easel, which is still seeing some play, and also the 2-cost Brenyu, the Navy Searcher, that is going to be rotating out. I mean, honestly, other than that, we have like the green Momonosuke, but like green Wano package hasn't really been all too significant recently. Any sorts of
forget this one, Kai. There's one you cannot forget. You main that deck.
You mean this one? I have my opinions on Rebecca Searcher, because we have gotten a very good alternative Rebecca Searcher in OP15 that can also search cards called Rebecca, which I think is very significant. So there's things like that. I do think another one that's very significant is Spend Them as well, just because in OP15, for you guys as well, especially because you have OP15 as well as EV04 together, you have Lucci buffs as the Lucci cards are disappearing. So a little bit unfortunate that's happening. But is there any sort of archetype that you feel like especially may have a bit of a hole missing? I understand also like for the green-blue Sanji faithfuls out there, there's the 2-cost Nami that's going to be rotating out as well. But is there anything in this regard, some sort of packages that you think should get some more support now with cards rotating out?
Am I crazy for wanting more yellow Big Mom cards?
I'm thinking, like, I don't want replacements for stuff that already existed. I just want, like, because what Green lost was some of its most impactful top end in Kid and Tenkos, Doffy. But honestly, I wouldn't like alternatives to those. I would just like more like green tools which move it in directions which are not strictly defensive, and like define out basically Bonnie's identity. Because whenever defensive green is good, it means it's like going to be used by Bonnie the best. Maybe Mihawk is actually a better contender now, but even that, I'm not sure if. I think Mihawk had like some very fortunate positioning into the OP14 meta that might not be the case in 15 onwards. But I'm not claiming that with certainty. I did not test Mihawk much yet. But that type of playstyle where you actually go wider on the board, I think is more suitable for green. And actually, yeah, it does tie into a package that rotates, like the entire film package from OP02, where 7 cost Luffy, 4 cost Brook, the film Nami. Those are the 3 most relevant pieces, and they rotate, and they do kind of provide that type of swarm identity that decks like Green Uta, for example, could utilize.
I wanted Wano to be good for so long. I mean, I even played it at Nats, but I do think that I've been frustrated with the fact that the Wano threats have always been bad, at least the top end. Like, the best card that we've had was like 4 cost Yamato from like OP2, in my opinion. And I really, like, sure, we got the new Kikunojo, I believe, in EVO4, which is like a pretty
She's
like,
not even a
reasonable
good card, I think.
Yeah, she's just okay. But the fact that we still get to keep exactly "You Can Be My Samurai" and Green Otama is like also legal. I feel like there was a little bit more room to give this deck or this core a little bit more power, especially in like the later part of the game. OPO2 Kinemon's been crying for multiple years now, trying to get some extra support, and not much has come out.
Yeah, let's just forget about OP01 Odin, like it didn't exist.
It's crazy that like green Wano just like never got support ever. It got like half a set of support in OP01 and got half a set of support in OP02, and then it was just forgotten forever after that. Like, it took us a year to get a 5/7 vanilla, but by then it was too late for Kinemon to be good, and like we never got the top end that we wanted. Like 8 cost Odin was something, but I mean, in the face of things like 9 cost Zoro now, it's really not a card.
Yeah, I'm actually surprised about their decisions made on which cards they would preserve for rotation, because some of the searchers they kept like the green
One cost Bonnie.
Bonnie,
Yeah.
and then indirectly they also kept Nami because she got the manga in one of the EBs. I don't remember where she got the manga, but
PRB01.
Yeah.
But I don't know why they wouldn't have preserved Momo. Like, he was rather low impact searcher that it had a lot more potential and was less limited than future search options. For example, like the Green Otama, which only adds greens. Yeah, it's a weird decision because they kept a lot of the 0 cost events, but then recently they have started printing 0 cost events which are strictly better. They just have different typing, but they're like the same 0 cost effect, but then you can also do something else with the main effect if you want to.
Yeah, I have a bit of a conspiracy theory on why these cards were preserved, by the way, if you want to hear it. So, yeah, I'll tell you the timeline as a Japanese player, the perspective of us with PRB02 coming out, because these were the cards that were reprinted in PRB02 and therefore preserved through rotation. And so basically, PRB02 was announced, they showed the cards, and they came out. And then when they came out, people realized that the block 1 cards still said 1 on them, but they said that the cards that are going to be preserved are going to have 4 rewritten on them. So everyone was like, did they really just give us a set full of cards that's going to be irrelevant in like half a year or something? And people were confused. It's like, wait, so are these cards not rotating because they're in this set, or are they rotating because they still say 1? And then a whole day passes, and then Bandai comes out with a statement that yes, all these cards are going to be staying. So my tinfoil hat theory is that they never intended for these cards to be staying, but because they didn't plan well enough ahead with PRB02, they were kind of forced to keep these cards in, which is why we have a lot of really random picks in the thing. Like, I don't think that like a lot of these cards are very relevant. I also think that like cards like Kaya, for example, we have the new Otama, the OP13, I think, Otama, that feels like a straight upgrade over Kaya, and because Kaya and Otama both exist, it's a bit weird in a way as well, because one of them strictly better. It seems like one of them just should have rotated out. My theory is just that they intended for these cards to rotate out, but they kind of fumbled the bag and they had to fix it somehow.
That theory does check out, but I will say it's not always strictly better, just because, I mean, that's the beauty of having a wider card pool in games without rotation. In vacuum, weaker cards can be stronger in given situations. And I think a good example is, because currently we saw some up Sanji decks play Kaya. I think Enrico had Kaya's in his deck, because a common strategy against up Sanji, you don't hit them when they're on 4 life. so they don't hit you with the high roll where they play Sanji, they play Otama, discard Sanji, leader ability, stealth black, and now they have 2 Sanjis on board because you hit them for no reason, and they could set it up. And Kaya allows you to bypass that, so because you don't have to be on 3 life. So I think situations like that can arise from time to time. But also, I think when they were making that decision, I don't know what they were planning with OP03 Nami at that point, but I'm wondering if that played at all, just so she can, or at least the promo Nami, because she cannot even build a legal deck, I think, now after rotation.
No, I think she like only has 48 cards or something. It's very close, but not quite. Yeah.
Wait, I just remember, didn't Blue Nami, like the promo Nami, just stop in NA? I feel like I've seen
top
that
cut. Yeah, I got top 16, which is there's been one player, Rohat, that's just been, he did very well in Nats to make a top cut, and he also made top cut in the most recent Texas event. The man is a menace, and I think that a large majority of it is the fact that a lot of people don't know how to play against the configuration of Nami, which is just like a bunch of very small units, like one cost Nami, rested hanger, that stuff, and just making sure that you have to apply pressure on those is like a very unintuitive process. But yeah, he's been cooking nonstop, and props to him to repeatedly top with that deck.
And now Bandai doesn't even let him play the leader because he cannot put 50 cards in the deck.
Is promo Nami like block 3? That was just block 1 in my head.
No, she was given the new block, I think. I don't remember if it's 3 or 4, but
Other than that, I don't see anything all too significant in terms of like searchers. But there are a couple of kind of almost Hall of Fame level 2Ks that have been staples in their colors for a very long time. In particular, I mean, there's a couple of like very solid ones, but I think that like the main ones that come to mind are going to be one cost Otama as well as the one cost Sida. And I think that these are probably going to have a lot more significance to the colors that they're going to be leaving from than like any of the searches that we've mentioned so far.
I would agree, but I think a lot of that is just historical significance. Black has almost entirely lost its identity as a cost reduction KO effect deck, mostly because of Emu kind of only caring about base costs and having a lot of deck building restrictions. And like we talked about before, Red, it kind of lost a lot of its power and luster. So despite how ubiquitous those cards were in the first couple sets, they just like aren't really playable. They haven't really been playable since like OP11, basically, it's felt like. So I will be missing them, and I do think that if they go back to kind of relying on those color identity aspects of Red and Black, that we'd love to have them, but I just don't think that they kind of hold the test or pass the test of time at this pace, at this rate. So maybe one day.
Explanation, because I think it's very telling that the last like Weenie Rayleigh deck that played a lot of Weenie Red deck that played all the one cost was Rayleigh, and he didn't have any need for Atama or Makino because he was designed without them in mind. So it was mostly just like the old days carrying them. I'm not sure how many copies Shanks ran. I assume he ran the full 4 Atamas.
Yeah, he ran for it,
but he didn't run the Makino, for example. And as you alluded to earlier, there was the Sanji that Red could use to avoid starving. But as other colors got better in tempo, because they actually got the 5/7 for 6 units, which can contest board, turns out taking your life is not the ideal strategy, because without ways to generate advantage, as soon as your hand is drained, you're on the losing end. And yeah, Tsuru, like, she has alternatives still, weaker ones admittedly, but they do exist and they're still not seeing play just because all the traditional black removal decks have been invalidated by all the forms of protection. And I think as this protection is introduced into the game more and more, we're just moving more towards like the roots of the game, where it was all about tempo, attacking correctly, and well, depends on the matchup, of course. Against TL Wolfie, like there's pretty much never a point to hit his board unless you have significant power reduction. Just swinging correctly, developing as much as you can, having good blockers, good countering. But yeah, like they're obviously moving black and more in a jack of all trades type of stuff. Power as well. Those have been the recent designs.
Black for sure, especially like every new black deck that comes out feels like it's not a black deck, it's like a unique deck, and it just happens to be that all the colors are black. Like Ema doesn't feel like a black deck, it's an Ema deck. Teach is a Teach deck, and Crocodile is a Crocodile deck in a way where like they interact with cost to an extent, but like Ema's just all base cost. Crocodile doesn't actually remove characters based on their cost, and like Teach, does have removal, but like a little bit different in the way that he functions compared to some more traditional black decks like Lucci. And I mean, even Lucci, as we saw with the EB03 or EB04 buffs, they're trying to move him away from a removal deck by giving him a Burgess type card in that 4-cost Lucci. So there's like, they're very clearly trying to move away from that. I still think that like a card like Otama or a card like Tsuru, although I guess Otama does have the new Ace Sabo Luffy card that's kind of a replacement, but like if or when those types of removal decks end up coming back, I do think that those are those are the sorts of cards that you kind of wish you would have had. And so I think that maybe though we may not feel the ramifications of that quite yet, I think later down the line it'll be one of those cards that will be missed.
And just an observation, I realized while you were talking, we talked earlier about how Yellow kind of gets to do a little bit of everything now, but part of it is due to how Yellow has been designed in the past, where a lot of the time Yellow decks have just been like, take the best Yellow cards, put them in a 50-card pile, and that was kind of your deck. The engines were much less defined, and the same was true for Black. But as time went on, Yellow kept being designed around this idea of just produce some good cards and put in the good cards, and now you have Yellow deck building, which can include a variety of engines, a variety of playstyles, whereas Black, every new leader that is disconnected from the previous playstyle of removal is designed with its like own support and packages in mind, and that limits how you can build and play those leaders much more than leaders in the same colors releasing in other colors releasing in the same set, just because you're limited to this specifically one package that you don't really get to share.
You'll be happy to hear that Crocodile in OP15 runs a non-Baroque Works card in the 7-cost Luffy, which is, I think it's a very cool card for that deck. But it feels very rare nowadays to have a card from a different archetype actually work in a black deck. Like, Ema has 1 and it's Ground Death, Crocodile has 1 and it's a 7-cost Luffy, and like, for the most part, your deck is kind of built for you. So like, black is only as strong as Bandai allows you to be. Which, maybe if we're on the topic of red trauma, back from OP03 when it was the strongest color, they probably have some black trauma as well, considering how many black cards that they've banned.
The problem is, actually, the biggest problem with OP15, there's so many decks. Like, there's so many decks that got support, like, there's so many decks that lost cards. And if you want to test, I think it's impossible to test everything. Like, if your goal is to compete in a tournament and win one of those amazing new serial Luffys, as Yonas did, by the way, make sure to congratulate him if you already haven't. If you want to win one of those, the decks you have to learn, they're Enel, Lucy, Blue Yellow Nami, Blue Yellow Boa, and maybe one of the like more on the side yellow picks like the Luffy and the Kalgara. But those are decks you have to play them, you have to play against them, and just make sure you're ready for what's going to be happening in those games, to make sure you don't time out and like take losses you don't have to. But if your goal is competitive, and that's why you're watching these podcasts, you definitely have to test, because there's so many options, and the more you second guess yourself, the more time you're going to lose, like just not progressing.
Yeah, I think that's probably the best philosophy, because I spent a very long time deciding on my deck to eventually bring Moria, which meant that I didn't have as much time to actually practice it. So I lost a game that I really shouldn't have, and then it went a little bit downhill from there. But yeah, I think that like the meta is kind of jungly in a sense, where there's a lot of potentially viable decks. There are a couple of decks that will stand out above the rest, and I do think that there's quite a bit of skill in actually like piloting a deck like Lucy correctly. I think there's a lot of unique lines and interactions that deck has with other decks, and I think really a lot of it's going to come down to like your matchups on the day, as well as how good you are at the deck that you're piloting. So whichever deck you decide to bring, I think that there isn't necessarily an incorrect answer, because Purple NL, even though has been coming down a little bit in popularity, still very, very powerful deck just on its own. And I think that can be said for like a lot of decks in LB15, which is part of what's very interesting about it.
I'm not looking forward to the breadth of decks I need to figure out, especially when there's a lot of OP15 events in the very, very beginning of the meta. In North America, specifically the US, there's like the Red Bull Finals the first weekend of OP15, which is like a really like important event for a lot of players. And then there's obviously the low regional also happening on the first week. And I imagine there's other events as well throughout the world, but all of that's going to be very difficult to get through over the next 2 weeks. So everyone's got to put on their bootstraps and make sure they can figure out the entire meta and try to figure out what deck they're really comfortable with.
For sure. I've kind of given up on figuring that out. Like, I tried Lucy, very interesting deck. I feel like I don't have enough time to like fully understand it. I tried NL, who's like in a weird way simple because you only have 6 dong, but also in a weird way complicated because you need to know exactly which events to hold on to for late game. Difficult in different ways. Same with Black Yellow Moria, where you don't have to think all too much about what you're countering or what you're taking because you're so low in hand size, but it's difficult in different ways, like how you use your leader effect. Because this set has been more focused on characters that are a little bit lower in cost. You know, you look at decks like Yellow Luffy as well, who's like, sometimes they're on the 10 cost NL, but for the most part, like 7 cost or less type characters. There's a lot more flexibility in your turns in this meta, and I appreciate that compared to the old metas where it's kind of just like, once you reach 10 dong, you're just playing your 10 costs over and over and seeing whose is going to end up being the better one in the end. Ways to play out the game in OP15, so it's a lot harder to sort of identify quickly if a matchup is winning or losing in one direction, because the NL matchup versus Hancock felt very NL favored, but then as Hancock players have adapted and played even harder towards the Borsalino Quasar playstyle, because it wasn't a given that you ran 4 of each towards the beginning of the meta, now it is. People have adapted, made that matchup better for Hancock. Lucy players adapted, put in the barrier pistol, which is very good into Hancock. And so in this way, the meta's still changing, and I'm sure that it's going to change even more. And because I don't want to have to deal with that, I'm still playing this.
It's just
Yeah, I don't know what I'm gonna hit, but at least I know how to play my deck, and that's good enough, sort of thing.
And that's a pretty reasonable summation of the entire OP15.
Yeah.
You're going to have a bad matchup no matter what deck you end up playing, and at the end you just need to be able to dodge your bad matchup and try your best if you hit it, and make sure you don't lose those good matchups. So regardless of what you play, you just need to make sure that you're confident in it.
That's exactly the best advice in the jungle metas, just because you can't account for all those outside factors, but the fact is, whenever you win the tournament, there was some luck involved. Like, you had to have the right draws, have some favorable matchups, and you just have to accept that part and just make sure that the things you can control are, optimal. That if you're playing your best deck, the one that you have the most experience with, all the lines, all the relevant matchups at least, well, that's the best you can have. And whether you're going to do well on the day or not, it's not going to be entirely up to you, but there's also, like, no reason to beat yourself up over it as long as you made the correct choice in terms of deck. I haven't decided on a deck yet, but Emo has been on my radar as well. Maybe I'll actually send Kai a list of all the decks I want to think about and ideally test, because it's going to be a long list. So maybe you can just flash it on the screen so you can see how deep the madness goes.
This is a massive scroll bar.
Yeah, no, it's still going. But like, honestly, I've tried a lot of decks in OP15 as well. For one reason or other, decided not to play them all the way through. But there were decks that like definitely stood out to me in testing that I just didn't feel like I got like enough reps in, or didn't feel like I was like quite good enough at the deck to give like a proper evaluation of. And those decks were like Purple Doflamingo, who got 2nd place in a regional recently in Japan. Black Crocodile, who ended up winning very surprisingly, seemed also very good at the beginning of the meta. Red Green Luffy, and Black Yellow Moria. And like, those were the 4 kind of like rogue-ish decks that seemed like decent to me in my testing. But like, I mean, I think it goes very deep. Even like a deck like Blue Kazang, I feel like has some sort of potential just with things like Ice Time, being able to basically lock anything that exists within this meta.
Now I have 5 more decks to add to my list of testing.
Yeah, there's I think especially because of the weird release schedule of English, where they mixed EV04 into OP14 and 15, the release schedule between Japan or the East and the West have become very, very close. I feel like right now the West is only about 2 weeks or like maybe about a month behind the East right now, which means that like for the first time in quite a while, maybe ever, you guys are getting a very, very unsolved meta because we're still in the middle of solving it as well.
Just to point out one thing, they did make it so that the formats unify effective with OP17, but in effect we're only getting like OP16 10 days after Asia does. So in my mind that's already like same format, like we're basically getting it at the same time, and only starter decks have I think 3-week difference or something. So yeah, as we're nearing that point, like we're going to have a lot more of these deck building puzzles, and especially in wide open formats, there is way more problems to solve, because now if you take any like random deck, you have this problem of you have to be able to not die fast, because that's what NL is very good at doing to other leaders, especially for life ones. But then you also have to, on the other end, be able to deal with like this board presence with on-KO effects. If you cannot like somehow invalidate them, ideally remove them through bottom decking or bouncing, you're just not going to get anywhere against yellow. So trying to balance these two things, you know, if you manage it, you probably have a deck that beats everything in the meta. And if you don't, then you're just playing your comfort and hoping to dodge the bad side of those matchups. But you can always just go for the generic best pick, which is probably going to be Lucy or Nami, I would say at this point.
Currently does seem to be so, but I mean, once again, for the 80th time this podcast, I will mention that Ema beats both those decks. So the meta is always a circle where the reason why Nami and Lucy, or I guess the reason why Nami is good is because Hancock and Enel was good, and the reason why Lucy is good is because Nami's good. So the meta is just going to keep going around in a circle, and eventually it's going to be like, well, if Lucy's good, then I should be playing, I don't know, Blue Rebecca, and then if Blue Rebecca's good, then I should be playing like, you know, any sort of 7K leader, honestly. But like, it gets very, very complicated the more that it goes around, and you don't need to just be lucky. You don't need to just have like experience on the deck. You need to be in the right part of the circle as well. So lots of complicated things that the West doesn't always see all too much, because eventually like the meta does stabilize to some sort of agreement of like a couple of best decks. But as the meta is very volatile, it's the first time in a while that I can't really confidently say what the best deck is right now.
I'm kind of out of ideas to talk about, to be honest, but.
Yeah, I think that that's probably maybe a good place to wrap up. If there's any other small things we want to mention, then I think we can. But I think we talked a lot about the ban list, talked about rotation and OB15 like all in one episode.
When we can talk from a point of more experience from like me and Jonas as well, I think we can go way deeper into individual decks and their positioning into the meta. But yeah, there's like 2 or 3 weeks until the format actually begins for us. So I think that will be good material for the next episode.
Yeah.
Because I assume that's what people will be most interested in. But I assume there's realistic expectations that we haven't solved everything 2 weeks before the set releases.
Oh, come on. We can do better. We can do so much better. We can just solve everything.
We definitely can. Like, if we didn't have a serial Luffy on the line this first weekend,
I'd be testing 15 already. Yeah, for sure. So.
Yeah, I mean, I'm always excited to see what you guys have to cook, because honestly, I trust Western deck building more than Eastern deck building, because Eastern deck building feels like such a bubble where like everyone's just copying each other, so no one's actually like improving. So I'm very, very excited for when simultaneous release ends up happening. And yeah, but especially for like, I mean, we didn't really even talk about Enel, who is this like omnipresent OB15 threat, but I think that deck building for that leader as well can get very interesting. Recently, people have been putting in the 3-cost Porsche. I don't know, it's Porsche or whatnot.
The Foxy Porsche.
Yeah, the
do they run any of the targets or just to bring out the dog?
So I think that people are only running the 2K Foxy as a target, as well as herself. And it's mainly to bring out the dog, but I haven't seen people. There's a card that I have my eyes on that I haven't seen people actually run, and that's the 3-cost Heat from ST10, which is a 3-cost 4,000. When you reduce Dong, goes up to a 6K, which is basically Holy. But just having more copies of Holy in the deck, I think there's a lot of potential to that, because the difference between having and not having Holy is very significant. So I think that there's some interesting things to try in NL still. Lucy has a lot of events to pick from. Blue Yellow Nami has several versions, all of which can be viable in the right context. And then, I mean, Sky Luffy, also a deck that's been coming in here and there, especially as Lucy has been becoming a bit more popular as well. So lots of decks to look out for. I think that that's definitely going to be something that we will talk about more as OP15 comes closer to the Western release. I'll try my best to be able to explain how those decks work at least on a surface level, as I keep playing OP15 in Japan. But with that all being said, I think that it's time to wrap up this episode of the All Yellow. I noticed that I was looking around before if I had a yellow shirt somewhere, but no, I don't have one with me. Anyways, thank you guys for coming to this episode of the All Yellow podcast. Next time we'll be back with the All Blue to talk about things like purple NL and anything not including pudding, because a blue deck without pudding is not a blue deck. Thank you guys for dropping by. Make sure to follow, like, subscribe, all that good stuff. Make sure to check out all of the socials of Yonas and Hrvoje as well. And we will see you guys next time. Bye-bye.